Welcome, modern day mystics, fellow truth seekers. James and Justin back again, and today we have another special guest with us. We have Alex Shailer from his self-titled YouTube channel. Now, Alex, he is an expert coach, meditation teacher, and anxiety healer, and a big part of his channel focuses around non-duality.
Yeah.
So I'm sure we're going to get into some really fascinating conversations.
Anxiety coach.
Yeah.
That's stay tuned for that. Who doesn't want to reduce their anxiety? But also, I've been getting into some of his videos on law of attraction, and I find it very interesting what he has to say about that. That's, manifesting what you want and attracting things into your life.
Yeah. So anyway, guys, we won't keep you waiting. Let's get into it. Alex, so good to have you. I thought maybe a good place to begin as a non-dual expert might be with your story a little bit before non-duality, and then, what brought you to that point, and then kind of now living in maybe a world of non-duality as a teacher.
It's hard to pinpoint exactly where anything starts, right? If you look into the story, it could have been dreams and out-of-body experiences as a child. It could have been some random person chucking Zen koans at me in a chat room when I was 15. It might have been downloading Alan Watts talks off of Napster when I was 16, waiting for the whole evening for them to be downloaded excitedly by the morning. It might have been when my 10-year relationship of that time broke down when I was in my early 30s and being introduced to the power of now. That's one I usually point to, because if you can point to any moments, there was a pivotal moment reading that book of realizing, hey, I'm not that mind story, that tortuous theater in my head. There's this presence. I don't know if I didn't conceptualize it as awareness or consciousness at that point. It was just sense perceptions. It was just the space around the thinking, as it were. But that was a great revelation, and also did open up into a deeper exploration into, because Eckhart Tolle's quite accessible, sort of mainstream branch of this, gives you a good sort of relative in and something to relate to, and then eventually you start going down YouTube rabbit holes or whatever, as most people do, and you're bowing down to the guru algorithm and and getting served up all kinds of stuff that's on the side of really radical non-duality, and also, the awareness kind of stuff that's out there. If anybody doesn't know non-duality that well, they might not know exactly what I'm talking about, but there's different expressions of this message, which often point back to the same thing, this truth of our being as inherently peaceful and free and flawlessly perfect and wise and whole and complete. And that's a big overview. Can I point to any particular moment? It's been kind of stages of revelation and unfolding, and I don't think it ever really ends. And what it reveals ultimately is that it was a story anyway. Now it's a memory, and that all we can really verify is ultimately true is just this presence of awareness now. But definitely in the dark night of a soul after a breakup, there's a great desire to eject from that mind story and the feeling of the emotional pain happening to me and being bound to that whole cognitive landscape of limitations. Yeah. And so hearing the silence in my dark room, as opposed to just the voice in my head at that time, and the space that opened up for me and what followed, was probably quite pivotal.
And you're very good at, you're part of a growing tribe of people that are getting very good at, through explanation of these things, getting directly to the point where you can actually cause a bit of an identity shift or gestalt in someone listening. I noticed even when I was listening to some of your videos, just the way you were sort of talking about, I suppose, like the persona of a person, being identified with an individuality that's false. So one of your videos, I can't remember which one it was. I was like, I remember noting, oh, that like caused a little bit of an identity shift, even the way he was talking about that. To get into the non-duality stuff a little bit in terms of identity.
That's great to hear. That's what others are reporting. That's what people are reporting. Uh, I mean, the idea is, you create your content to communicate this message. And in some people, it's heard. And like on a human level, I'm a simple guy. I can't dress things up too much in fancy words and concepts and layers before I feel very quickly like I'm getting away from the essence of what it is. So
Yeah.
people are saying to me, yeah, oh, the reason why I like your stuff is because it's like direct and simple in a way. I hope at least simple. Sometimes I think I overcomplicate it, but because I like that directness myself, I guess there's a personal desire for that over here, like just to point straight towards it. And I think also it's a message, and mine isn't the only form of this, but this message is, I think, really applicable to the modern world, because awakening, enlightenment was, you'd usually first hear those words in association to the Indian gurus or sages or something, and then you might think you might have to go to meditate in an ashram for 20 years, or fly around the world and get a guru, and you're thinking, hang on a minute, I've got a 9 to 5 and a wife and kids here. So what the modern non-duality, what is pointing to is that it is available immediately. Okay, there might be an embodiment phase that might have happened before the so-called awakening or enlightenment in the more traditional paths, an unfolding of the awakening or an embodiment, or sometimes people call it integration. But what's, I think, very appealing about it to a lot of people is that it's really taking down the obstacles and showing the unconditionality of this message, that it's not something to be achieved in the future. There is things to be achieved on a relative level in terms of emotional states or states of manifestation or whatever. Obviously, there is the relative world of form, but that all happens in this unconditional allowing and peace, which is instantly realizable and instantly accessible and always immediate.
Before we jump in too far, I'm always trying to be aware that I know there's a lot of people that watch our channel from different backgrounds and different traditions because of the content that we do. So they might not be familiar with exactly what we're even talking about here. So maybe it might be good to just get like a quick breakdown on how you define non-duality, just for maybe our newer audience out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Your content's quite varied, isn't it? And so I guess there's many different ways you could express it. And at the base level, non-duality means not two or one without a second. And what that's basically saying is the nature of reality, or the nature of self or God or the universe, whatever you want to call it, is non-dual, as in it is already a single indivisible whole. It is already nothing that is appearing as anything. Everything is already the infinite. And non-dual realization or revelation or remembering is the remembering of that truth. And the dissolution of the belief in what's often in non-duality referred to as the illusion, which is the limited separate self, which is said to be illusory in that it is not ultimately who we are. We may appear as a body and a mind and thoughts and a personal story and a personal history, but even the most skeptical of us can recognize that there's something bigger than that here. This presence of being, this space of awareness in which this all takes place, and non-duality is pointing to that as the fundamental reality, that consciousness, the totality as the fundamental reality to who we are and the nature of reality, and that is immediately available to be recognized, and that one can recognize that we are not just a limited, separate self. We're not ultimately that. We may appear as that, but our true nature is beyond that. And our true nature has qualities, you could say, in the sense that it is peace, or you could call the peace the path all understanding, as its nature. As in, there are ways of investigating to see whether that is true in your reality, in your experience. Inquiry questions like, has any of your feelings, thoughts, experiences harmed you? Awareness. You can see through investigation that allowing is its nature, is your nature. Has this space of awareness that you are ever resisted any of the content flowing through it? And so in resting as our true nature, as this presence of awareness, the implications of that become clearer and clearer in our life. And that peace and qualities of awareness that we are, the peace and love and allowing and acceptance and wholeness, can pour out into the person, as it were.
It's actually amazing when you read about somebody like Jesus or Buddha, and it looks good on the onset. It's like, look at the stuff Christ would talk about, like loving people and generosity and being slow to anger and all these things. And it's like, from the ego's perspective, it might be like, well, I'm just going to do that then. I'm just going to be slow to anger and I'm just going to be generous. But what you're talking about is interesting in the sense that if you actually start to resist the ego a little bit, or watch it or whatever, and it gets a little quieter and slows down, and then maybe reality or the non-dual perspective starts shining through beyond the persona, those qualities start to emerge. It's just, there's something about trying to communicate that with an ego or two egos, where it's like, well, I'm just going to do it then. I'm just going to act that way, but it doesn't work out that way. And that, I don't even know what I'm getting at. I think I'm just trying to bounce off of what you're saying, but I'm just noticing the mystical nature of it, because this stuff gets talked about so much, and the ability that you have to refine it down and get to it quickly is impressive, and others. And I think that there's something true about that. There's something true about the authentic non-dual state shining through the persona versus an egoic approach to it that tries to discipline itself into being good, or discipline itself into being charitable. There's a difference there.
Yeah.
We can talk about that.
Yeah, I feel like you've made a few different points there. It's like,
for sure,
the nature of communicating this, because we're pointing towards ultimate and trying to use relative dualistic language, and also pointing to the fact that if one tries to reach this through the paradigm of being a separate, limited individual, which is ego, in the sense that ego isn't an entity, there's nothing there, it's just the belief in being a separate, limited individual, and a belief in that thought narrative. So if you're trying to achieve this from that level, then you can't do it from that level, can you? Because
and it's unfulfilling and fake and not real, and
it's just trying to swap out one form for another.
Yes.
Which is what this is pointing to, is the source of all forms. It's trying to find wholeness, unconditional wholeness, under the premise of being a separate, limited individual that's going to find it in the future. How is that ever going to happen? It's trying to find the nature of yourself in the future, when your nature of yourself is only ever present now, and it's always it's trying to find the true nature of reality in some kind of state in the future, when the
Right.
true nature of reality is true
Or
now, if it is the true.
correct. Or like I was saying to James before we started, or like retrospectively, like I was just baffled at this idea of somebody being like, well, the important thing is I've lived a good life up till now. Like, what difference does that make in the present moment? You know what I mean? Like, I love this idea of this sudden emergence or present moment realization, you know, as the in real time alleviation from suffering and something to help you out of the grasp of the ego, you know.
Exactly.
Is it more realistic to for there to be kind of like a gradual coming into non-duality rather than these grandioso stories that we usually hear where like he was sitting on a bench and all of a sudden it dawned on him and he was the one, he was enlightened, he figured everything out. I feel like more and more we're starting to see kind of this gradual, like as people start to learn about this and do whatever practices they're doing, they're kind of like one day just realizing like, wait a second.
Yeah, what's the deal with it?
Something's changed in me.
Does it have to be sudden or can it be gradual? And what is that? Why do we hear about the stories why would we be fascinated with some all at once story, you know? I hope that parries well with what I'm saying.
Yeah, I get it. Like, I mean, most of the people that are famous around this have quite grandiose stories, as in, like, for example, Eckhart Tolle was on the verge of suicide when there was this awakening. And you see, the actual recognition is beyond anything that's happening in the world of form. It's beyond time. It's beyond any particular emotional state or experience. However, it can look the effects of it, as it were, can look different in different people. So what it can be the case is that when there is one who is really truly deeply suffering, in that moment there can be a desire to look deeper and beyond that. And then when the truth is glimpsed, the contrast between that and their current suffering state is so big that it creates a huge shift in the body and mind. And then we have grandiose awakening stories, like I thought I was going to die and then I realized I was the awareness, or whatever it is. But that is not necessarily the case for everybody. For some people, the recognition may be very subtle, or it may go completely unnoticed, and yet their life still converges towards more peace and love and harmony and happiness. And it's dependent on a lot of factors, but that's one of the main ones. It's just the perceived contrast. If you're sort of floating around and life doesn't seem so torturous at the moment, the relative peace of being might not seem so profound and groundbreaking to begin with, and the mind can't even really register it. The mind can't capture consciousness. It can't get out of this to capture it, you see, because it's an appearance of this. It can only ever register changes that happen as a result of this recognition. So the recognition is always the same, whether it be like, guru master has sudden awakening, or average Joe just slowly opens up to this. It's a timeless recognition of this simple presence of beingness arising as everything that's always immediate. And so I hope that answers your questions. Like, those are the reasons for the apparent differences. Really, it just unfolds in others' lives differently, depending on their psychological states.
Yeah, and I like what you said about how it can appear differently. You know, I'm imagining somebody who even identifies that they are suffering or have been in a lot of pain, and other people are like, you seem like you're killing it to me. Like, I thought you were like successful and doing well, and that person realizes that they're suffering, and then they have a big change, and they're like not as egoically invested. You know what I mean? Their life takes on a different looks different from the outside. It's that in that way it's sort of a personal thing, I think. And And of course, that's just one of the many versions of it that can happen. But I feel like I've observed that sort of thing happening before, where the onlookers of somebody might not identify it as some dramatic change for the better. It might look any kind of different way to onlookers, I would imagine.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends a bit. If you're one who's really still in the throes of materialism, and one of your friends is suffering so much they're willing to let go of a whole identity based around accumulating accolades or things, then you two might gravitate away from each other at least
Yeah.
temporarily, because there's a mismatch in desires
Yeah.
now. You know,
Yeah.
there can be a transitional period where our desires change and are not motivated so much around building, well, probably not at all, building up a personality. Um, there may still be the acquiring of material things, but not under the impression that they're going to give you any permanent peace or security. Those kinds of illusions tend to be seen through, and so our desires and the kind of conversations that we want to have can change. But I feel like even though there's a transitionary period, and some people can feel a bit lonely, and I understand that. I think if you don't have to consent to that being appropriated as some kind of story and identity again.
Yeah.
If resting as your true nature as awareness, people will naturally appear in resting in the knowledge of yourself as not separate, as whole, as consciousness. That tends to start to get reflected in your life in terms of the kind of connections that show up. Also, things that life circumstances that are gonna point where you're still not free in the body and mind, where there's still stuck, limited emotions or thoughts that have survived the recognition of your true nature. Life tends to give you circumstances to dig the rest of it up and release it in the light of awareness. But I think it's.
Sorry, I was just right there. That was an interesting thing that you were saying about stuck things as this stuff is either falling away or as you're developing. And could you talk at all about, say, after awakening, proclivities that somebody may have? Like, I mean, there seems to be a consistent personality that keeps returning with anybody. Like, I think about Adyashanti, or I think about Eckhart Tolle, or I think about Osho. So there's variations in how they present themselves, but there's a consistency to their character every time they return to speak. And can you talk at all about why that would be? Like sometimes I think that people underestimate how much of their identity is just a choice. Like, go out somewhere and change your accent, or go out somewhere and behave like you're a different person, just to get a sense of how fake the persona really is. But some things are pretty strong, like your tendency towards, I know that you coach with anxiety, maybe we could even get into that. The tendency somebody may have to physiological anxiety, like my partner, when they speak in front of large groups, always goes red-faced, whether they're embarrassed or not. It's like a physiological reaction. So I was wondering if you could talk about that and what role anxiety plays, or like a tendency towards certain things. Is it always something that you're supposed to outgrow, or is some part of it a dawning realization of who you truly are? Like what role this avatar you are plays?
Yeah, well, there's gonna be
so much. Sorry for making this such ridiculously complicated.
I mean, I think I can engage with it. I can engage with it. Well, it's if I can remember what we were talking about. It's there's different types of conditioning coming in, isn't there? There's mental, psychological conditioning and emotional conditioning. And because we appear as relative human beings, each human has unique conditioning, and so therefore a unique expression. And really, it's like, in a way, you could see it as like what's filtering through that expression, or paradigm is that expression operating under? Is it operating under fear, limitation, or is it operating under the premise of I am peace, wholeness, fulfillment? And when there's a recognition of our true nature, the conditioning in the body and mind can survive that and still emerge in life as old patterns of thinking and feeling. And often people feel like sometimes they've lost their awakening because it appears to have taken them over or something like that. And there's this effort to try and stay present and not get caught by that. But ultimately, we have to see that no matter how strong it appears, we are still consenting to it. Ultimately, it may appear to be a challenge to so-called not identify, but eventually we see we are consenting to it. Now, if that seems to be more tempting, the more strong the energy is, and the stronger the energy is usually associated with how much emotional conditioning there is, and how, in one way, you could say, like, how deep our emotional wounds are or our traumas. Those of us who have experienced complex or major traumas may have a particularly strong energy pattern of contracted emotional energy that we label fear as anxiety left in the body and mind. But this can be lovingly approached, and the foundation is just resting as your true nature as awareness. But also there are approaches that can be engaged with to have that be released from the body and mind gradually over time. And then over time, it's like less of that appears to be obscuring the natural qualities of your true nature. Because I can't remember if we pointed this exactly earlier, or this was getting to something you originally was saying, but it is like, why do we act in fear, unloving, anxiously, neurotically, controllingly? It's not because of our nature. It's because of the fear, the things, the fears, the anxieties, the perceived limitations, contractions layered over the top. And what we find is that being this authenticity, this love, this confidence, this natural ease and flow isn't something that's added onto us as a new quality like that we have to achieve. It's that we find that it's naturally present when those other
Yes.
patterns are released, you see. So this is part of an embodiment journey, which can happen so-called after a recognition. But with the recognition, you realize it's timeless anyway. You can't really pinpoint it to one moment, because what it's pointing to is even any story about you not being awake or you might fall asleep in the future is either a memory or a thought now, and you're consenting to believing you're the I in that thought. So just be.
So as a child, are we being trained out of awareness? Is that essentially almost what's happening through environmental conditioning?
It seems like the me mode, I don't know when it switches on 2 to 5 or something like that. Things become about me and mine, and then there's all the social conditioning that refines
Hypnotism.
it.
It's a
Yeah.
hypnotism. I used to
Yeah.
ask I'm going to take it in kind of a stupid direction here real quick. But I used to ask a question like, what does it look like when a moron gets enlightened? What does it look like when Quasimodo's enlightened? You know, because like, but like, think about it. Take somebody like Quasimodo, man. Those villagers were relentless. They told him what his role in that town was, and that was to be alienated and everybody mean to. I know it's a fake person, but some people will identify with this story. Like, it doesn't matter what kind of light I got shining out of me. The people around me will remind me who I am. And then if I don't behave that way, I guess I could secretly be enlightened and be like, you know, which maybe Quasimodo was. But I just wanted to address the idea of falling back into unawareness, being entrained even after enlightenment back into unawareness, the fear of losing your satori or the fear of losing this awareness that you gotten, because you do have a world to go contend with. You know, there's been times where like I have this proclivity towards aggression, you know, my whole life I have.
And there have been times where it really feels like this is what's being called up. You know, it doesn't matter if I went and I just did a marathon of meditating and, you know, I could sit and, you know, way stiller and calmer and more blissfully than I otherwise could. There are times when it feels like there's a reflection happening from the individual. Like, I'm only reflecting what I feel like I've been called to be precisely based on my proclivities. Can you talk about that? What happens? Is it like, do you just want to make sure you got a really good enlightenment so that you don't fall, so that it's undeniable? Like, can that be talked about?
Well, it's really just seeing and looking at reality honestly, and us really being honest about reality and admitting that all of that that plays out is this consciousness appearing as that. So any appearance of an apparent individual who's supposedly not awake or unaware or something is still the freedom of you, your true self consciousness, to appear as that.
I missed that. I missed what you said, believe it or not.
So if there's this, you were saying, is it just like you really make sure the awakening is stuck or something like that?
Well, if it's undeniable, like if somebody comes back and their head's glowing, you can either crucify them or accept them as the returned Messiah. But if somebody comes back and they're having a private satori and you're like, okay, time to sweep my shit up, you know what I mean, peasant, you know, and you're sort of pushed into some societal role based on who you are. Like you said, because maybe we all do kind of start off enlightened and then we're sort of hypnotized and trained like, you know, this is you. I want you to think of yourself as a separate identity. And we build up this ego over the course of our lives. If somebody realizes the non-dual nature or has some glimpses of that, you know, ox herding painting style, what is the deal with that? What is the deal with the feeling as though the contrast between being so heavenly minded, you're no earthly good, and the reality that you've got a role, and sometimes your role's a unfavorable role. I mean, depending on what time you emerge in history, you might be like a literal slave somewhere. You know, what happens when a slave becomes enlightened? Are they definitely a messiah every time, or do they just, there goes another one, nobody even knew them? You know?
Well, the good news with awakening is that whatever is apparently happening, whether, you know, you're in slavery, torture, or in the middle of a breakup, there is a part of you in the background, which is all of you, which transcends the appearance and is unharmed by it. Now, that doesn't make what's happening on the relative level relatively good or right. It doesn't justify things that are obviously immoral or heinous, but it does point to a perspective, a meta perspective beyond it. And then the situation can be approached much more empowered. So if there is a chance to change it, to escape the slavery, to get justice, to draw a boundary, for a different situation to manifest, it will be most likely to manifest in, despite what's appearing situation, not putting your power on that to say, oh yeah, it's, you know, in society conditioning us back into the ego, whatever. It's recognizing and admitting to ourselves that we are consenting to that belief in being limited and personal and that thought narrative in the mind, and that no matter how, and that's what I was pointing to earlier, like no matter how those patterns show up, there's still our true nature consciousness, this consciousness appearing as that. It's like no matter what's happening in a movie, there's always a screen, and the screen is unharmed by the movie. Be knowingly the screen-like nature of awareness, and perhaps the movie will change.
And having that understanding that you're watching a movie is always advantageous to thinking you're in the damn thing.
Oh yeah, I mean, we'd go to the cinema to kind of slightly lose ourselves in the movie, don't we? But we wouldn't want to ever actually think we're in Terminator
I can't get
or
out of
Aliens.
this theater and I'm burning alive. It's the end of Inglourious Bastards. So we got to get to I don't know how much time we got, but we have to touch on the no FAP stuff. We have to touch on the law of attraction stuff.
Okay, all right.
have to.
So okay, a lot of some. I think it was some of your first videos. There was a lot of no FAP content. Sexual control, all this stuff. How? Let's somehow swing that into this non-dual conversation, because I'm sure there's some helping points here with that. It's and then we'll go into the law of attraction stuff after. So what made you want to create all the sexual restraint, I don't know how you no fapping, all this stuff, sexual control, whatever? How did you get into that? Like, why was that your first opening videos on your channel and stuff like that? And how does it relate?
Well, I didn't think it wasn't the first videos, but I think it was some of the first videos that really got popular.
Yeah, I got like 250,000 views, man.
Probably because it's a spicy sounding concept, isn't it? Like, and that's probably why. And I think, as you're going into something, I was obviously trying to create the means for me to be able to serve people and in that you communicate different concepts or models or modalities that have personally served you. And at that time it was, in the sense that I didn't realize there could be such a profound difference in energetic state by doing one thing versus the other, by masturbating to porn every day versus not doing that. As long as things are obviously ethical, no judgment, no one thing's good or one thing's bad. It's just that I noticed a big difference. And there can be, and then also, I'm like a guy that likes high energetic creative states, and so I think that's why it particularly appealed to me at the time, because there's a lot of energy in letting that energy build up within you. It's a bit like fire. You can warm your house and stay alive, or you can burn your house down. Like energy is not good or bad, and so it can express itself in functional or dysfunctional ways. But I tend not to make so much content around that now, because over time it's just my content has evolved, and what has become really essential to me and my audience has gradually been distilled further and further towards what we could put under the label of non-duality. So but still there is interest in the energy transmutations and how that is represented in all different ways, in the food that we eat, in the energetic flow throughout our body, with the body state.
Well, it can all be a tool, right, to help, lead to self-realization, right?
Well, I wouldn't position it as that, because self-realization is unconditional, completely unconditional.
All right.
Certain energetic practices may appear to lead to something, but any practice that appears to lead to what is, it is ultimately seen through, in the sense that what is already immediate and unconditional. In terms of conditional states, a high energy state or a low energy state,
that's interesting.
Then yeah, doing one thing or the other could make a difference.
I didn't watch any of the FAP stuff. The bottom line is it works, correct? It works to change your energetic state, maybe give more energy. James was saying that in some of those videos they talked about your hair growing in thicker.
The vast majority of people report it does. I mean, a lot of it's going to be anecdotal. The data, the scientific evidence is, that there have been some studies, but the anecdotal reports are through the roof in terms of people saying how their energy changes.
Remember that
And
one? Remember there was a guy that we used to watch that was like, he was doing a no fap thing, but he was like semen retention. He was drinking other people's semen. You remember that guy? He went off the rails with the semen retention stuff. And I think that maybe that's a sign of like like you said, you can burn your house down with something. You know, you can go a little
or
too
you
far.
can get dogmatic with certain practices.
Or get dogmatic. I don't want to I don't want to miss the practices that, because like there's so much about like turning yourself into a pretzel so that, you know, you can become enlightened essentially, right? Like using yogic practices. Is your stance that not like we don't need those things, or like there's a more direct way beyond all the practices?
Yeah, it's this kind of not, is there anything to do question, isn't it? And this common thing of there's nothing to do. And it's like, if there's nothing to do, then is practices completely useless or something. But what this message is really saying is that there's nothing to do, in the sense of nothing to do as an individual to recognize your true nature, because what it's pointing out is that your true nature is this immediacy of aware presence now. Is there still something to do to drive your car to work, to heal your emotional pain, to, in a way, align thinking, some behaviors, states of feeling to this revelation, to this remembering? And so yes, there's practices can still obviously be useful in the relative world. And the relative world is the relative world of form of our human experience is just as valid. It's real. It's just illusory in the sense that it's not what we thought it was. We thought it was this, that we are just this body and mind separate from the world, and the world is out there, and that we have to chase peace, happiness, and fulfillment in the future, to the recognition, no, I already am this consciousness, this awareness that lacks nothing and is ultimately needless and desireless and at peace. Although there can be this expression of it, this unfolding of it in the way it expresses in life, in terms of manifesting, conscious manifestation, maybe is pivoting a career towards something that celebrates this truth, understanding the message, and so it can be also intellectually understood. You know, there is that level as well. It's not the ultimate thing. It's not the actual thing, but there the embodiment looks like many different ways, and one of those ways is the intellectual understanding. It's also the nervous system really relaxing, and the traumas and the emotions healing. And there can be relative practices that can help with that. But what this is saying is that you need not make that a condition to recognize your true nature, because your true nature isn't a state or an achievement in the future. It's the truth of what all states appear as, all forms, the most anxious person, the homeless person, the kings, the queens, the most enlightened gurus. It's all equal. It's all this one indivisible screen of awareness appearing as that. It's all the being, God's being, appearing as our in apparently individual forms. So, you know, it's about practice. In summary, practices can be helpful, you know, in life and in embodiment, but it's just that they ultimately can't get to your true nature, because your true nature is always this immediate now. In that immediate now, there can be many practices that can create many different states of experience in life.
All right. Yeah. Yeah. It's to me, it seems like there are practices that could be conducive to an enlightened. You know, one person talked about it as like the moment the fruit's ready to just fall out of the tree. You know, it just drops. And I think sometimes people get confused if they see an enlightened person having an alcoholic drink or something like that. But I'm of the mind that you might find if you do a practice, like if you abstain from drugs and alcohol, or you stop fapping, I don't know, or whatever the case may be, that might be the thing that something to do in that pursuit might just create fertile ground for an enlightenment experience. But nevertheless, it doesn't necessarily make it 100% repeatable, that's how everybody's going to acquire enlightenment. But I do think that there are some practices that might make people more like the environment more conducive to an enlightenment experience.
Well, it's always going to look like something, isn't it? At the end of the day, to even be introduced to this concept, you're going to watch a video, aren't you? You're going to read a book.
Yeah.
You might go to see a guru in India. You might turn up to a non-duality Zoom. You might appear to practice self-inquiry, etc. But ultimately, and it's not to say that relatively those things aren't part of the appearance, or relatively they don't help. It's just that what is ultimately seen is that this aware presence of our true nature is always present in the face. It's what all those practices are appearing as, and so it truly is unconditional like that. There can be someone who's smoking and drinking, and there can be a revelation of this, because it's still the same consciousness appearing as that. Does it make it relatively healthy, or is it a relative embodiment of this recognition? I mean, there can be a debate about that, but it tends to be that once the piece of one's true nature is seen, there can be a gradual letting go of a lot of destructive habits, but not necessarily perfection. But because there's less of a momentum of trying to immunize emotional pain through compulsive habits. But any of this momentum can take a while to kind of slow down and filter out. I mean, this recognition for me really happened many years ago, but I've been on a journey of embodiment for years, relatively still, in releasing all those fears and anxieties, and having that knotted ball of trauma gradually unwinding, and so that I can actually communicate more and more so from a place of love. Even though once you got the message, you can hang up the phone, it's always there in the background. Even when you're in the midst of an argument, there can be this recognition in the background. This is just an act.
It saved me from arguments. I swear I never was able to stop. Since doing some consciousness work, thank goodness to people like you that teach people online, I've been in arguments where I've stopped, where I've been like, what am I doing? I can just stop this right now. I don't have to follow the inertia of this thought, or the inertia of my defensiveness. Exactly. It's amazing. That is a good tool to be able to be taught, to be able to be coached in.
Yeah. Well, you said you wanted to jump into some of the manifestation stuff. Law of attraction.
I'm interested in that, yeah. I mean, I feel like I've listened to a few Law of Attraction books, and consumed my fair share.
I've listened to a lot of attractions.
Yeah, there's a lot of talks on it. What should we know about this? What should everyone know about the Law of Attraction?
About the Law of Attraction? I haven't positioned myself as an expert on the Law of Attraction, and don't tend to use the word that much, but I did make a video recently using the word, because I think we all relate to different aspects of consciousness and spirituality through these concepts, and manifestation is something that I was really interested in, or in a way like I am, if you define it as creating things in life, the active creation in life, flow, manifestation. It's juicy, isn't it? It's the whole unfolding part of this dream, the form, the ups and the downs, and
I feel like the hallmark. I feel like the poster boy for Law of Attraction is like Jim Carrey or something. You see speeches where he's talking about writing checks to himself, and And then the weird thing is he evolved to somebody that's like says peculiar things like, well, I hope everybody gets what they want, so they see that won't solve it either. And then, I'm wondering if you're going to go, if it's going to transition to the point where law of attraction terms in just gets a little more sophisticated, where you, rather than from an egoic place trying to manifest riches and wealth or whatever it is, that you move to a place of seeing that you are the attract. Anyway, I'll let you talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, the law of attraction definitely in the West tends to get filtered through a personal lens, because that's the culture that it's filtering through our cultural lens, you see. But it was always really known as an impersonal law. However, it becomes this thing of, I'm visualizing and manifesting. I am a separate individual. I'm going to imagine what I want, and it's going to manifest. It'll be attracted to me. Whereas the law of attraction could be seen through different lenses. In a way, we could say, like, what's actually manifesting? Is a separate individual manifesting? Where does the manifesting power, who does the manifesting power belong to?
Right.
Well, really, it can only belong to the manifesting power, the manifesting consciousness. So manifesting is possible, but not on the paradigm of being a separate, limited individual, for that is an appearance of the manifestation. That is the appearance in the manifestation. The true manifesting power is the beingness, the consciousness, the awareness. And when one recognizes and relaxes into their true nature as awareness, as consciousness, then the desires tend to come to manifestation more frequently, because you're now living and experiencing in line with the truth of who you are. When you're trying to manifest from the perspective of being a limited individual who's trying to attract something to you, you're under the paradigm of powerlessness to begin with. When there's this recognition of yourself as the manifesting consciousness, then situations can unfold. Does it mean that life challenges are never gonna come? No, that it may be that events are ordained from a higher realm outside of time, and there's different things that are unfolding in order for the growth of the soul, or however. There's many different ways you could define it, but many find obviously that when there is this surrender, which is really recognizing yourself as the surrender, as the spaciousness, which naturally allows everything, insights, intuitions, and synchronicities appear to come in, and what was personally desired tends to manifest more frequently.
The desires of the heart get manifest, even,
Okay.
It's more deep desires that get manifested. It's sometimes I think about, like, because a lot of religions will be like, well, you're going to get 72 virgins, or there'll be this promise of you'll walk on streets of gold. But I imagine it more like a genie in a lamp coming out, and you being like, all right, I wish for riches, and the genie being like, instead of that, I'm going to make you not care about riches anymore. Like, that's not the same thing. It's not the same thing as the egoic desires, It seems like in all honesty, imagine you could explain that to somebody that was struggling. They had a sense of lack. They're surviving, but they've got a sense of lack that's causing them suffering. And you say, rather than just giving you what you think you need, what if I could take away the suffering that is born from thinking you need something? You know what I mean? There's deeper desires within you that may be accessed and lived out, that are from an intuitive path you may have a more direct route to. Yeah, I think you covered the law of attraction stuff very well.
Well, I will say, I do remember a point having a lot of money anxiety, and I'd been exploring some of these concepts, and there was even a knowing at the time, really, that this is just really showing within me where there is still this attachment to this fake security, you can know that very intuitively and completely, and yet there can still be the momentum in the nervous system that responds to particular events like checking your bank balance or something like that. And so really the path is allowing all of that fear to burn itself out. And then life will show you those opportunities. Like that's where business building, creation really becomes like a that's the real value in it, not in what you apparently manifest at the apparent end, but what but the journey in exposing all of your limitations.
Yeah,
Because
which I
that's
think
what you have to let go of to
I
manifest the
know,
thing.
I know, and that's the juicy core. That's like where it's at, but it's a hard sell sometimes. Talking about those things.
Well, we all want the cars and the sex and the
Right.
money. So
Because we've been trained to, because we've been told to. You know what I mean? Like, it's just weird.
also,
like,
it's the soft security.
Yeah.
Our basic sense of security is tied to this.
Yeah.
It really can feel like
And
if I
trauma.
run out of money, I will die, or I will just be perpetually embarrassed into hellland. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I've got
it's both.
sympathy. I've got sympathy for somebody that it seems superficial with. Like if you go to school and you were poor when you're growing up and you have bad clothes or something, people make fun, and then you grow up to always want to look a certain way. I have empathy for all those type of things. Anyway, sorry.
No, I was curious, kind of about just kind of like consciousness directly. Like this might seem kind of like a cheeky kind of question or whatever, but like, what's consciousness doing? Why create a reality like this? Make it forget what's going on, and then go through this process of remembering or awakening to itself. What is going on here?
What else was it gonna do?
Yeah. Yeah.
I like that answer.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't. I think it would be a bit pompous of me to claim I know like God's plan or something like that. But
Take a jab. Just take a stab at him.
but what we can deduce is that for a dreamer to appear to itself, it has to forget it's dreaming, doesn't it? If there's consciousness and it's just infinite consciousness, or it's just pure equalness across an infinite plane, shall we say, there's no contrast, there's no appearance. And so the non-duality appears as the duality. It's in the appearance, and it's how it appears to itself. And through this current dream, we could say, it does itself through the human experience and the human body and gravity and the laws of physics and apparent cause and effect and probably some of the other physics constants or whatever. And so consciousness in a way like sets up these perceived rules and dualities as a way to appear to itself. And ultimately, I would say to know itself by contrast, because that's the only way that it can apparently know itself, by contrast. So in a way that seems to be reflected, doesn't it, in the great story arc of life. It's often this descent into fear and confusion and lostness and forgetting, and hopefully this return to love and to truth. And so the universe is in a way forgetting itself and remembering itself through us and through our trials and tribulations and challenges. It's probably a refinement as well of individual souls. However, all those individual souls are still a fractal of the one consciousness, which is appearing as, 8 billion humans and however many trillions of animals and aliens and everything experiencing itself, through these different forms, as it were. As some people say, it's just for the joy of creation, or there's no meaning or purpose, or but at the end of the day, all dualities collapse in the end. Purpose, no purpose, will, free, no free will, no free will. Is it doing something for a reason? Is it not? Ultimately, it's infinite freedom because it is infinite consciousness, isn't it? Because the whole concept of God is infinite. So, what is infinite doing? Infinite.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, here's a question I kind of like to ask for the new listeners out there. That I always like to ask this question for anyone who accidentally tripped over a video like this and is like, "What are these guys talking about?" And then they're somewhat intrigued and they're like, what would I do to begin here? Like, where do I start?" And as maybe like a coach, maybe for that person there, you might be able to give some, I don't know, some direction. What would you say to that person?
I'd say to start, just simply be, and just be yourself, be as you are. And secondly, there are thousands of books and YouTube videos and everything now. You can go down a rabbit hole so easily. As soon as you touch it with a 20-foot barge pole, you're going to get sucked down that rabbit hole.
Yeah. Yeah. And then what about the person who's been kind of on this journey for a while and they might be feeling stuck? Like, man, like it's just not happening for me. Everyone else, it seems like, I see all these guys and new people popping up everywhere, but it hasn't hit me yet. What about that person?
Well, can there be a realization or a revelation that one is consenting to believing themselves to be an individual who hasn't got it yet?
Yeah. Yeah. It's so true though. I agree. I've heard that happen many times. Like somebody come to the master, the teacher, or whatever, so certain of a problem. The teacher's like, just what if that's not true? And I think about what people do get certain about. People are often certain about their woes and their troubles, right?
Mm,
It's like like after everything that goes on with a baby being born, the mother's sitting there and they're holding the baby afterwards and they're crying, they're so happy, forgetting a moment ago it was agony or whatever. And that's really nice, like we're here right now, we're not in the midst of chaos. It would be, we could very easily tap into being, like you said a moment ago. But I have heard it said that sometimes people question their happiness, but they don't question the negative things. It's just a habit, possibly, to do that. And so I just agree with that. I agree with that notion that for the seeker that's been at it for a while, it's like maybe the biggest hindrance is that narrative or something. The narrative of like, I've been at it so long. When's going to be my turn? It's like, try
it's always
unbelieving
coming.
that for a second. Just try unbelieving that story.
Yeah, otherwise it's always coming, isn't it? I mean, relatively, if one message isn't resonating, it's like move on, isn't it? Like it's move on, maybe something
Yeah.
else. I mean, and also there can be different. I remember watching Eckhart Tolle for the first time and just thinking, I can't connect to this person at all. I have no idea. And then came back to it a few years later and it was received in a completely different way.
Yeah.
So, just, it's curiosity in life. You can't stop
Yes.
it, can you? Like, you're going to stay curious because there's always something in the background. If there's that dissatisfaction or lack, there's always something in the background that's driving us towards the revelation of these truths, whether or not your suffering is really high and you feel desperate and you're really willing to drop that identity and look beyond it, or whether it's more of a creeping fascination that eventually something just appears to click.
Can we get a glimpse of could you talk at all about your coaching, like
how that works, the coaching or whatever it is that you do with guidance for people?
Yeah, certain people work with me and we have powerful conversations to keep on pointing out this the immediacy of this true nature. And for that to be embodied and for me to be of service in any general way I can. I mean, I started off as a coach in the sense of a coach in its purest form, not how it's interpreted nowadays as usually an advice giver or something like that. But really, coaching started off as asking powerful questions to promote awareness in others, awareness and I think the official words were awareness and responsibility. I'm not sure I'd use those exact words, but it points to the fact that when we have powerful discussions and we're allowed to investigate our own experience and what's true for us, that can be a very powerful modality. And certain people, that's for them to have that one-to-one time, to have those powerful conversations, to point this out and to have assistance with embodying that either through emotional guided releasing and healing, talking about it so there's that intellectual integration, or just pointing it out over and over again until it's realized that it was always realized or something like that. And everybody comes to me with different goals or desires, or some people obviously are like, there isn't any desire ultimately. It's just seeing what's immediate and the truth of beingness. And so a lot of people experience fears or challenging emotions. And so that's a doorway in, this desire to release and transform that. And it can be a spectrum of different things. And, some people come in wanting to really discover true nature. And I will never position my service as something that like, here, I'm going to sell you awakening or something like that. Like, it's available, always immediate now. Although also we can have conversations where I'm going to point this out over and over again and help do whatever I can to be a reflection of you. It's you manifesting me and talking back to you, pointing this out and having your body. So that's what I offer. And then there's some online materials to go with that. And people make inquiries at the moment. My services might change in the future, but right now that's the offer I've been doing for quite a while. And I really have done that for a long time without just like quickly transitioning to group offers or things like that, because I really have valued that one-on-one time together. That's where I felt I really learned the most and grown the most myself. And in a way, there's the most responsibility to actually create shifts together, because it's not just a throwaway course that you might buy and then forget about. Like, no, we're here having conversations and we're going to see what's happening over the week. So
Brilliant.
Yeah,
it's not the same
available.
thing as some show or something, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like there was a time prior to the internet where people like yourself could connect with people where it was like 90% of it was a show. It was a circus show, you know what I mean? Just to get people in the building to hear, maybe we'll get to the deep stuff. But nowadays, it's amazing to me that you can get right into those, you can connect with people, and then you can talk to them and get right to it. I think that's brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, from what I could see, all the perceptions I had about needing to do certain things in a particular way, to, communicate your message and then have people contact you about, potentially services or whatever. It's just become more and more simple over time. I just say what I want to say and what I'm interested in and what I think other people are going to be interested in. I try and create value. I try and just give it all away on the video. Don't hold anything back. Just give it all away. And then a certain amount of those people, most of those people are going to be like, thank you, next video. And some of those people are going to be like, oh, I want to talk to this person and go deeper. And then I have conversations and just give and give and give and give. and then eventually, if I feel like I can really help, I'll offer something. And if we do it, we do it. And if we don't, we don't. And it's just so simple now. Like all this, when you first start getting into entrepreneurship, and there's all this stuff about selling and everything, and obviously like it's some kind of structure. It's to a process is appropriate, but I found now the right people just gravitate towards you, and also that it gives you the ability to just put out just all the free content as well, and that's so you don't have to have my services. You can just watch the content and that there's a lot of value there. So
Well, that's some great stuff, Alex. Me and Justin, we want to thank you so much for taking the time to come and join us on the show. It's been great. Time went fast. That was a great conversation. Talked a little bit about your coaching, but maybe for our audience, to close things out, you can let them know where they can find you, how they can reach you, anything you might got going on, and we'll wrap her up.
Sure. YouTube, Alex Shailer, alexshailer.com. Free resources on there. And speak2alex.com if you want to book a call about a coaching inquiry.
All right. Well, great.
you.
Thanks again so much for joining us, Alex. It was awesome.
Thanks for having me on.